Hey everybody, welcome to Click 3D. This is the program where we're going to be talking about photogrammetry and how you can use nothing more than just a simple digital camera and some software to create some really nice 3D models. My name is Eugene Liscio. I'm a 3D forensic analyst, and I've been using photogrammetry for years now. I've been teaching it. I've been using it in my casework, and I really believe that photogrammetry is an amazing technology because it allows you to do so much with very little. And so I've been trying to promote photogrammetry along the way and teach it to people and give them a lot of tips and advice. And that's what this program is really going to be about. So this is the first episode, and today I'm going to be covering a few things, but I am going to be covering 5 common mistakes when photographing for photogrammetry. And these are things that I have seen people do in my training courses or just on their own when they're new to photogrammetry, maybe people that are not all that comfortable with a camera. And so what I want to do is just highlight some of these things. This is not a full, complete list. These are just 5 common things. And there are other things that you can consider as well when you're creating a photogrammetry model. So I've got some graphics that I'm going to show you, and we're going to get in and we're going to get right to this for sure. So the first one, mistake number 1, not getting in close enough. And I'm not sure what it is, but when people are new to photogrammetry, a lot of them, when they take their photographs, they feel like they have to get the object or the subject that's of importance, plus a lot of the background. And so as a result, the image or the subject is taking up a very small portion of the view, and that's not really what we want to do. So for example, if you look at these images that I have here, let me zoom in on that a bit more. The image on the left is, we have a knife on the ground there, and we get a lot of background, right? So we have a lot of this background stuff. If I was just interested in the knife though, I want to get in close, just like the image on the left. So like I said, I'm not sure why. Of course, you can do both. You can get in all around and get the background, and then you can also bring in the close images. So there's nothing wrong with doing both sets. In fact, I would recommend that you do both. But oftentimes, people just forget about getting in close. Okay, so that's a very simple tip when taking your photographs, especially if you want to reconstruct a particular model. Don't be far away. And it really comes down to the number of pixels that subject is taking up. If you're far away in the image and it only takes up, 100 or 200 pixels, well, it's not going to be all that helpful. And this is also really common with people who are flying drones. So you're flying from very high up, you're flying over a roadway or something like that. You're taking a lot of photographs. But if, let's say this was a crash scene or something like that, and there's evidence on the ground, you got to get in close to the evidence if you want to see it in great detail. Don't rely on, a drone that's, 400 feet in the air, even though it's a high resolution camera, to get you a really great result. You got to get close. And now when I talk about getting in close, I also don't mean just zooming in with your lens. Try to get physically close to the object. Okay, so that's an important point. If you get physically close, it's not the same as being far away and then, using the telephoto lens. So this is the first example here, and keep that in mind. Okay, so number 1, getting in close. Let's go to the next one. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. I was going to talk about this as well. And that has to do with breaking things into thirds. So this was just a tip. So we're not moving into the next one just yet. One little tip that I give people is if you have a subject and you want to get in close, break it into 3 pieces in your head. So kind of break it up into thirds. And here you'll see that I've just kind of drawn 2 lines to say, there's the bottom of the shoe, the middle, and then, the front end of the shoe. And when taking the photographs for this, it would look something like this. So you'll see that the front half of the shoe, or the first third, takes up most of the view. In fact, you can even cut off part of it. Don't be afraid to get in even closer. But this would work okay. 70, 80% of the image is taken up really close. And as you overlap, you'll see that, and you've got the different images there. There's enough that it can reconstruct this particular model. So breaking it into thirds is really helpful. Okay, Now we're on to mistake number 2, and that is, and I'd sort of given a hint, I talked about overlap and not having enough overlap. So overlap is really important because the photogrammetry software can only reconstruct what is common in multiple images. So if you have a photograph, but there isn't any overlap of that particular item in other images, or can't see it in the other images, it doesn't get reconstructed. And so let me give you an example of that in a little video here. So I'm going to play, this is something that I was at a yard where I was doing an inspection on a vehicle, and I had this interesting truck that was here with some damage. So I just took my phone, took some pictures very quickly, maybe a dozen photos or so, and reconstructed the model. So it looks pretty cool, but what you'll notice is that there's some missing things here. So up on the top, over here, I had some missing data. Over here, you'll see there's some little patches that are missing, little holes and that sort of thing. And that has to do with not taking enough photos and not having enough overlap in these areas. And as a result, I'm missing some data. So if I had to go back and do this again, probably what I would do is take photos in a ring-like fashion. So I'll just pause it here, but basically going around above and below, and then even on the inside, like if you're down at the center of this particular rim here, what you want to do is point the camera upwards and get the underside here of the rim. And that's really what's happening. I'm missing some really, really important data here. So those are the types of things that I want to make sure that I get. Another thing is, if you're photographing a person's face, it's very common for people to sort of photograph horizontally from left to right and capture all this, all these different perspectives, which is great. But what everybody forgets is this part under here, just under the chin. So a good way to capture that is to photograph this way, and then photograph from the top and then come down, so that you got a few overlapping images underneath the chin and the neck area, and then you'll be able to fill that in. Otherwise, when you create the model and you sort of turn it upwards, you're going to see just a hole or a patch here. Now, sometimes the photogrammetry software will try to, they have algorithms will try to fill that in, but you won't have any texture and you won't have accurate geometry whenever you fill in a hole. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's really important to get enough overlap with all those particular images. Okay, mistake number 3, blurred images. And I get this often. Sometimes in the classes, people will say, hey, I took photos and I'm reconstructing the model, but it's not working out. Like there's something going on. It's either really noisy, the model looks terrible, or whatever it might be. So often when people take photos, and they just look at the LCD, or they look at the the little view, it looks great. When you have a picture that is really, really small, you look at it, it's like, wow, it looks crisp, looks like a great photo. Well, if you zoom in on your LCD, on your view, get in really, really close, and then start looking at corners of objects and items like that at high detail or high zoom factor, and then you'll be able to tell whether or not something is blurred or not. And so the thing here is that if you have two objects, one like this on the left, where it's nice and crisp, you have a nice image and you have fine details, the photogrammetry software is going to be looking at multiple images, and the two images beside each other, let's say, it'll try to pick off fine details in one or little features in one, and then try to match them to another image. And so if I have a nice crisp image like this one on the left, these little details where you get these sutures or whatever you want to call them on the skull, well, those are going to resolve or reconstruct really, really well. It's going to be really, really great, and you're going to get good textures as well. On the right here, I think it's pretty clear you have a mess. So the textures and the quality of the model here is not going to be great. You're going to have a few problems trying to put this thing together. So a lot of people don't pay attention to their images in close detail. So make sure that you get in nice and close, and that will be really, really helpful to the reconstructing the models. Okay, number 4 is a fairly big one, and that is that a lot of people don't pay attention to 3 important camera settings, right? The 3 most important camera settings that are that you can easily control. And some people maybe don't consider themselves photographers, but you have to remember you're taking photographs to reconstruct these models, and so it's based on the quality of your photographs. So if you have a good digital camera, and even on a lot of the just regular phones and things like that, there's little apps now that allow you to control things like the exposure and shutter speed and ISO settings. So download an app, play with it a bit, and get to know your camera. It's really, really important. So the first setting that I think is really important is going to be your shutter speed. And so if you have a very fast shutter speed, it's great because you're going to get an image that's with very little blurring or very little shake. So here in these series of images, you'll see that the one on the left is at 1/500th of a second. And so it's a nice crisp image of this woman jogging, and it's sort of frozen in time there. You don't see much blurring at all. But of course, if we reduce the shutter speed to 1/15th of a second, now we start getting problems. Well, obviously, this would not be a model that you could reconstruct very well. Now, of course, when you're reconstructing a model, a lot of times if it's of evidence or something like that, it's something it's typically not moving, but the photographer is. So if you try to hold your camera steady and take a photograph and you have a very slow shutter speed, you're going to run into problems. You're definitely going to have blurring. So typically, if you're holding the camera, once you get down to about 1/60th of a second or 1/80th of a second or lower, you're going to want to use a tripod, because it's just not possible to hold it really, really, really steady. And try as you may, you're breathing, just pressing the trigger or the shutter is going to cause some issues for you. And this is also apparent with drones. So when you're flying a drone, and especially if you're not stopped at one particular position. So some people will take video and they'll use the video to reconstruct a model. But even if you're under windy conditions and the drone is moving around, the camera might be gimbaled, so it helps to stabilize the image. But if there's any movement, you may get a little bit of blurring. So you want to minimize that as much as possible. Now, the downside of increasing the shutter speed or making it faster is that you get less light. Okay, so if you get less light, then the photo doesn't come out as well. So you have to kind of balance those things out. All right, the next one that I want to talk about is going to be the aperture, okay, or the f number. So the f number is also important to the amount of light that comes in. So if you have a low f-stop number or a low f number, the opening, okay, or the iris is open very, very big. Excuse me. So if you have a high f number, it's very, very small. And so small means you get less light. Now the effect of, or another effect of the f-stop number has to do with the depth of field. And so if you're photographing something which is very small, so here I've got this is a shotgun shell that I'm showing here. But if you look closely here on the left, I'm using a low f number. So that means that I have a very wide opening. I'm letting a lot of light in. And it's great because I get more light, but the problem is I reduce my depth of field. So the foreground and the background of this particular image appear blurred. They're just out of focus, okay? It's not because of movement. It has to do with the depth of field. On the right, or the image on the right, okay, I've got a much, much better image. I'm using a high f number, like f22 or higher. Increase the depth of field. The problem is it becomes closer to like a pinhole, a very, very small opening. And as a result, well, I get less light. So I may have to increase my shutter speed to compensate for the light. If I have a long shutter speed, going back to the previous slide, I may need a tripod because there's no way I'm going to be able to hold this open for several seconds in order to get a nice stable image. Okay, so those two things right off the bat, a little bit of a balancing act between shutter speed and then between the f-stop number. But unfortunately, it's just the reality of what we're working with. Those are the two things that most people will mess around with on their camera. Now, there is something else, and that has to do with the ISO number. So that's the third important setting on a camera. So the ISO has to do with the sensitivity of your sensor to light. So if you're in a very dark environment, if you increase the ISO up to a very high number, you can shoot in very, very low light scenarios and still gather pretty good images. However, if you have good lighting, there's no reason to shoot at a high ISO number. In fact, you want to turn it down as low as possible. Now, these two images here don't look very different from one another. Okay, so the one on the left and the one on the right look like they're taken from a tripod, and they look pretty much the same. But what we're going to do is I'm going to bring up a couple of images, and we're going to get in really, really close. So let me drag these. Well, here you got them. You should have them up on the screen here. So you're seeing them. Let me go like this. So this image here on the left, this has a low a low ISO number, excuse me. So this is about ISO 100, and this image on the right has an ISO of about 6400. Now, right off the bat, you can tell that these pixels here don't look as grainy. Okay, they don't look as noisy as the ones on the right. And if you've got a lot of noise or different, this graininess or whatever, again, when the photogrammetry software is trying to match one pixel versus the other, well, it's going to run into a problem. And that is that it's going to look for a nice crisp pixel in one image, and then it goes to the next image and it finds a bunch of noise. So you have to be very wary of the ISO number. What I would say, if you have good lighting, start with a low ISO number first. That'll get you the best image. If you can use a tripod, that's also really, really helpful. And then, use a long shutter speed, a high f-stop number. Your image is going to start really, really dark, but work down from there. So don't just go and use, I know it's so easy to grab the camera and click the automatic button and take your photos. And sometimes it's good enough. I can't, I'm guilty of that too. But when you really need to get into a high quality model and really, you really want to pay attention to the details, you have to consider these three things on your camera. Okay. So start with a low ISO number, high f-stop number, and also start with a little bit higher shutter speed, use a tripod, and then work down from there if you can. Okay, great. So those are 4 things that we've covered already, are 4 common mistakes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch into the last one here. Okay, so this is the 5th one that's very common. So that is choosing a bad subject for photogrammetry. Now, sometimes you're just stuck. Try as you might, and believe me, I've experimented with a whole bunch of things that gets me super frustrated because I'm hoping that, I'm going to get a really great model out of something. And unfortunately, it just doesn't work out the way you want. Okay. So some things are just not meant to be used with photogrammetry, just like a laser scanner or other technologies. They all have their limitations. Okay. So we have to keep that in mind. Let me give you a very simple example here. So here I have just a photograph of a certificate on a wall here, and there's a couple of things going on here that are going to cause problems. First is, let's talk about the background. Okay, so not the actual frame and certificate itself, but the background. A very plain background. So when you're taking photographs of just plain walls or very flat textured items, they are not good subjects for photogrammetry. They're going to cause you some problems. So if you run this through any photogrammetry software, typically what's going to happen is where you get high contrast. So for example, on the right side where you have the little bit of shadows and it's dark and then you get to the light, that part there will probably reconstruct. So around the frame and such, that might be okay. Probably a little bit of noise, but near there, especially where the wall is, near here, you get a piece of the wall that kind of reconstructs. But as you go outward, anything that reconstructs, if it even reconstructs, is going to be super noisy. Okay, it's not going to be a high quality model. It's going to give you some problems there. And unfortunately, not much you can do there except you can add texture. There are like little tricks and other little things that you can do there. You can put up tape, you can put up other things that have high contrast, and that will allow the photogrammetry software some things to hold on to. Now, there's other things that are going on in this particular image, and that has to do with the glare from the glass. So anything that's reflective will cause you some problems. So as I move the camera, the reflections move as well. So if we're talking about trying to match things from one image to another and they're moving, they're not in the same spot. So they're going to give us some problems. This is very, very common on cars, on vehicles. Vehicles are very challenging because they tend to be flat textured or very evenly textured or painted surfaces. So the color doesn't change or you don't get a lot of fine details. They're also very shiny or specular. And so as you're taking a photograph, you'll see a lot of reflections. And as you move, those reflections move. So it's this moving object that can't stay stationary from one image to the next image to the next image. And so it causes a lot of problems for the photogrammetry software. Couple that with the glass as well, which, you know, is kind of transparent. You get reflections, you get all kinds of things happening. Cars or vehicles are very, very difficult unless they are rusted, dirty, they got dirt on them, they're not shiny at all. Then that tends to help. So there's things that you can do. Coatings, adding tape or breaking up the texture somehow. I'm not going to get into those kinds of details, but those are the types of things that you would try to do to improve, you know, a model with just poor background, poor texture, reflections, and that type of thing. Now, a better example would be something like this. So the background is useful because it's got a lot of different colors and a lot of little features that it can match from one image to the next. So this is a better subject, a much better subject. Even the paintbrush itself, you'll see it has some writing on there. Here where the bristles are, there's a lot of different types of textures, and this should be reconstructed fairly well. Now, even on this brush, there's still some things that could cause you problems. And so the metal surface here is a little bit shiny. So as you move, you could get some changes in color, reflection, and things like that. This area over here with respect to the handle, it's still kind of flat textured. So it may not resolve or reconstruct all that well. And so that's something else that you might need to consider when doing the reconstruction. You know, things that reconstruct really, really well are things like dirt. So if you're photographing something on the ground, they work great. When you're flying a drone and you're taking images of the like of a roadway or ground or something like that, those also reconstruct really, really well. They're not shiny, they're not specular. They, you know, they're obviously still, but they have a lot of texture, a lot of different features that are very unique. And so from one image to the next image to the next image, they can be reconstructed really, really well. So to summarize, the 5 things that can get you in trouble. One is not getting in close enough. Okay, so make sure you get close. Mentally take that subject or whatever it is that you're going to photograph. You can break it into thirds and then photograph each section nice and close. So you pick up all those nice little features. The next one is the overlap, right? So you need a lot of overlap in order to photograph a subject and reconstruct it properly, but make sure you get all those hidden areas, right? We want to get photographs. If you're photographing a person's face or something, make sure you get underneath, you get all the way around. In the case of the rim for the tire, right, you have to get underneath and make sure you take photographs upwards. That's really, really important. The other one is blurring. So don't forget about blurred images. You know, make sure you hold your camera stable. If you can use a tripod, that's even better for sure. Also, the 4th thing, your camera settings. Okay, a lot of people don't mess with their camera too much. They just hit the automatic, you know, automatic mode and hit the shutter and then kind of go from there. Play with these little buttons, experiment with it, give it a go, and you'll start to notice differences and improvement in your model when you get really, really crisp images. Finally, the 5th thing is there's some things that just aren't worth it with photogrammetry. Every technology has a limitation, and unfortunately, photogrammetry does too. So if you're dealing with really shiny objects, really flat textured objects, they're not the best subject. There's some things that you can do to help, but sometimes it's just not worth it, and you're going to have to try some different technologies like a laser scanner or a hand scanner or something like that. So Those are the 5 most common things that can often get you in trouble, especially for people who are new to photogrammetry. Thanks for watching, and watch the next episode and we'll give you some more tips. Take care. Bye-bye.